All right, pardon me, man. I got a different little situation going on with the software. My main software is down, so I had to run to the backup, the good old StreamYard backup. You know what I'm saying? But listen, Andrew Berry dropped some explosive information about the Cleveland Browns and Shedeur Sanders in his most recent interview. We got to get right into it. He talked about Shedeur Sanders, new head coach Todd Monken, a lot of gems and information being dropped in this. And we got to get into it, man. Let's rock and roll.
Here with Browns general manager and executive vice president Andrew Berry. And AB, obviously, you know, one door closes, another one opens. We know how difficult that was, but this is a new beginning, and Todd Monken is now the head coach of the Cleveland Browns. Let's take a step back to when you knew you were going to lead this process to find the head coach of the Cleveland Browns. What was that like for you, and what did you want to accomplish from a process standpoint to get to the right answer?
I think the biggest thing is, you know, if you're hiring a head coach in the NFL, if you were to translate that in the business or corporate world, you're hiring either like a CEO or a COO. And it's a highly compensated, highly impactful role within the entire organization. And you want to give it the amount of dedicated thought in terms of how an individual skill set matches with the strategy of the organization. So for us, the biggest thing was, after figuring out where we were and where we wanted to be, is maintaining a very open mind. Great coaches come in different shapes, sizes, backgrounds, you know, you name it. And ultimately, you're trying to find an individual whose strengths align with what your organization needs in the moment. So we wanted to design a process that allowed us to cast a wide net and ultimately narrow it to the candidates that we felt fit what we were trying to accomplish over the next few years.
And if you think let's talk guys on the offensive side, your two final candidates were very different. You have one guy who has more time coaching, 37 years, and Todd Monken, now the head coach of the Browns, than Nate Shieldhouse had been alive. Mm-hmm. And how did you kind of weigh those two things, and what allowed, you know, at the end of the day, Todd to be, as you said earlier, head and shoulders above everybody else?
I guess maybe I'd make one clarification, Nate. I know that there's been a lot of focus on the external candidates at the end. You know, they were our two final external candidates, but sure, we also had a very fine internal candidate in Jim Schwartz, who was in that group, and he didn't have an offensive background. So I think that's actually a really good example of the diversity in backgrounds, but they all could fit the mold. Nate, pro and college background, had been 2 years in the NFL, really young, had learned under Sean McVay, had been a play caller, youth pastor. You know, Todd, super diverse, adaptable offenses, pro and college, worked under John Harbaugh, Kirby Smart, really good with young player development. And then we all know Jim, strong leader, former head coach, defensive savant, really well respected by players, and global knowledge of football, so he knows offense, defense, and the kicking game. We felt like we had a really strong mix, of the candidates of the final day. With Todd, we love just his performance track record, what we heard about him with young players. His offensive track record was quite honestly like unprecedented in terms of being on the open market. Pro, college, mobile quarterbacks, limited quarterbacks, star quarterbacks, air raid system, power run game. It's very rare that you can find a coach that doesn't have a system, but is truly fluid in adapting it to the personnel.
So you had to feel good when you went through the three final candidates. You felt like, okay, we're in a really good spot now, and now it's kind of sifting through and getting that answer, and that answer was Todd. You've talked a lot already this offseason about kind of redoing the offense, or putting a lot of investment into the offensive side of the football. How important, kind of as you went through this, was that shared vision of, you know, here's what the coaching candidate, or in this case, what the coach Todd thinks, versus what we think, and how we're going to kind of get that onto the same page and be collaborative to get to that right answer?
I would probably make a comparison to maybe where we were coming out of the 2020 season, where in 2020, when we got here, our biggest priority was surrounding, our young quarterback, Baker Mayfield at the time, with as much as possible to make sure that the offense could get off the ground. Now, we had a very patchwork defense at the time, and going into 21, it was obvious to anyone who had any, two eyes watching football where our investments would be. I think we're in a similar spot here, just with the opposite sides of the ball. So that, question is less candidate specific. Anyone we talked to understood
Sure.
that made the most sense. So there was probably very little time in terms of like, okay, where are we actually going to invest our resources this offseason?
How much is it in terms of when you collaborate with a coach, what they're looking for at each position? What here are the traits I really like in receivers. And granted, there are very few receivers that have all of those traits. So you try to get maybe one guy that's got all that stuff, and then good route runners or the vertical speed or tough, contested catches. How is that is that something that you talk about in this process, or is that now that he's here, now we're really talking about, okay, what we're looking for?
Yeah, it probably starts with more of a macro playing philosophy. Obviously with Todd's track record, there's a fair amount of flexibility, which naturally expands the player pool for you. With other candidates, they have a very specific system that has like some level of, malleability built in within it, where you may have to talk a little bit more detail on some critical positions, but it's really more from a global philosophical standpoint that you have those discussions. And then, once you get into the seat, you may drill down with more specificity as you're actually entering the player acquisition cycle.
When you talked about, this is going to be a young roster and there's going to be a lot of turnover, especially on the offensive side of the ball, and an infusion of young talent. When you have somebody who's been, coach for 37 years, and you heard him talk about since he was 5, he's been a part of the team and all he's wanted to do is be a head coach. How helpful is that to have somebody with that breadth of experience, not just in the NFL, but at college, where he turned a program around at Southern Miss, but then most recently at Georgia, which a lot of those guys on those teams are playing on Sundays now.
It's an incredible advantage. It's hard to find candidates with that level of diversity in their professional experience, and that level of diversity having done something at a high level in different ways. And that's where we think Todd really is exceptional from that perspective, because not many coaches have the proven track record of being able to do that, but Todd does.
So what does everything look like for you and Todd now, kind of in lockstep as we get ready to go? We're in February. We're going to be going to Indianapolis. We got the combine coming up. You got 2 first-round picks, which must feel like, wow, that's got to feel great for you as well. Kind of as we get to the point now, as we move to the combine, free agency, and really starting to flesh out what we think things are going to look like on that side of the ball.
Yeah, so I honestly, really the first step, and Todd mentioned it in his opening press conference, it's really assembling the coaching staff. That takes ultimate priority. Once we do that, then it's having our new coaches assess their rooms, us walking through kind of free agency plans, because obviously that's the first step up, and then working collaboratively on the draft. But the highest priority and the next thing is really making sure that we have the best coaching staff that we can hire.
How hard is it when you know that you found somebody that you want to lead this organization with you, and then we can't get on the grass for a while, right? Because that's when you really get to see what this football team is going to look like, feel what this culture is going to look like. But prior to that, what do you get a sense of kind of, what Todd wants it to be in terms of a culture standpoint, and how you want the Cleveland Browns 2026 and beyond to look, to feel, and for our fans to be able to maybe feel some of that before we actually get to see them?
Yeah, I think those are conversations that you have during the interview process, because we talk a lot about alignment here. You want to be aligned on that coming into it, as opposed to adopting one way or the other.
Sure.
And look, I think with good people, good football people, there's a fair amount of overlap with what people want to see. In terms of the impatience of seeing the team before the grass, honestly, we have a lot of work to do. So we'll take the time, and then once the weather gets a little bit better and we get to May and can hit the ground running, I'm sure we'll be pleased with what we see.
All right, so now you've got Todd. You guys are ready to get going. What's kind of the message to the fans? You've talked about kind of where this team is, but listen, everybody wants winning football. What's kind of your message to the fans about what they can expect over the next few months? We talked about that critical 120 days, right, Jimmy? Talked about to getting this team ready to be on the grass and get playing this fall.
Yeah, I think it's really 2 things. I think in the immediate term, we're going to hire the best coaching staff that we possibly can. Todd mentioned earlier today, it's not just about one person, but it's about the players and the staff that you put around your central decision makers. We're looking forward to investing in this offensive roster, and the amount of flexibility that we're provided both from a resource standpoint and due to Todd's background. We're excited about the different possibilities and the different avenues we can go. And a lot of what we think through and what we talk through will be reflective of that.
Well, thank you for the time, and good luck. I know this is an exciting, very busy time for you, and let's go.
All right. Thanks, Dave.
All right, so that's Browns GM Andrew Berry, man. It's a big season, and hopefully, we get it together. Hopefully he gets it all together, man. But I will see you guys on the next video, man. Let's keep the vision. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe, and share the channel.